abstain from Chair Randall. Okay, next we have revenue projection update. Mr. Longy.
Thank you, Chair Rochelle. I'm pleased to present you with the revenue projection update for fiscal years 23 through 27. We're making revisions to 23 through 25, and we're adding 26 and 27. This is in anticipation of our next action item, which is determining the pay-go amount, which would be used for project funding when the authority moves for its next update to the 6-year program in July. To briefly touch on the revenues, I think everybody's familiar with sales tax. They've been coming in very robustly, pretty much across the region. We look at sales tax on an individual jurisdiction basis and then aggregate that into a final number for the authority estimate. The next item on the list is regional congestion relief fee. I'll just note that that was originally reestablished in fiscal 21 at a reduced rate, with the legislation at the time calling for the full rate to be implemented in fiscal 22. So we are at that point carrying that rate through for the upcoming years. The Northern Virginia Transportation District transfer, which is the flat $20 million that we've talked about in the past. Again, that's a flat $20 million. So I will note that the purchasing power of that $20 million is now down to 18.3 million because of inflation. And that's the byproduct of it being a flat amount.
How much is it down?
It's down to 18.3.
2 billion.
Oh, close.
Yeah, that's the impact. That is the impact of inflation. The Interstate Operations Enhancement Program, which is also a transfer, that is what used to be referred to as the I-81 money. And it's now based as 8.4% of one of the Commonwealth transportation funds. So that's why that varies a little bit year to year. We get that number from VDOT. The $20 million is $20 million, and authority staff make estimates for the regional sales tax and regional congestion relief, the grantors. With that, the staff report goes on to note that, we made adjustments. Previously, we had made adjustments to revenue estimates that were somewhat pessimistic for COVID. COVID did not impact our revenue lines as bad as we fear. So these numbers are a bounce back from that, include a bounce back from that. With that, I'd be pleased to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Longy. And these numbers are the results of a careful and conservative estimate.
Yes, they are.
Yes, thank you very much. Comments or questions?
Madam Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Beckman, Mr. Longy, to date, how much I-81 money have we actually received in the door?
I don't have the raw number. I think the first year we ended up with 3 million, and then it was approximately the 4-some million. The state recognized that the formula for the I-81 at the time was not meeting the commitment to the restoration, and they restructured the formula. And now we're looking at about $20 million a year moving forward.
Do we know the delta between what we expected and what we received in the door after they reconfigured their projections? They reconfigured the projections for fiscal 22, and they're on track to hit those targets. Do we know the delta between what we expected initially and what we received initially before the reconfiguration?
It's about $17 million.
Not adjusted for it, but just 17 million.
Yes, just 17.
Thank you.
I would caution, I'm pulling that number off the top of my head.
Okay, but you're in the ballpark.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
No,
No, that's all. Thank you.
Any
Thank
other
you.
comments or questions? Okay. Do we have a motion? Who wants to read the motion?
Sure, Madam Chair. I move the Finance Committee recommend to the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority to adopt the FY 2023 to FY 2027 revenue projections as presented in Table 1.
Give a second.
Good.
All in favor? Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to number 4, regional revenue funds available for FY 26-27 programming.
Thank you, Mayor Rochelle. This is actually the number everybody's looking for. It is, again, the funds that will be available for the on a pay-go basis for projects this July. It starts with the revenue estimates that were just adopted or recommended for adoption. It goes through a series of calculations to add things such as the interest earnings off the portfolio. It adjusts for what the taper release. A lot of this, or a good portion of this, is putting back in funds that we have pulled back out of fear during the COVID time. I'll note that we had released all of the taper funds to support the prior 2-year program, and we had also used unaudited fund balance projections, and we used those earlier than we had previously done. As part of this estimation process, we are reestablishing those actions that we took for the prior 2-year funding in order to maintain the ability to use those best practices if, again, we see an economic dip. The COVID economic dip that we feared did not materialize, so it's not too painful to put that stuff back, but I do want to make it clear we were clear with the prior 2-year update that we were doing those things to bolster up the funding available to keep transportation projects moving. Now is the time to put those back in place, so if we need them again in the future, they're there for the authority's use. Running through there, the taper release, again, is adding money back. We have to account for debt service. There are projections for the operating budget because we transfer the operating budget out of the regional revenue fund. That's been the practice if the authority chooses to continue. 6-year program, congestion reduction relative to cost, technical support, long-term benefit technical support. Those lines were reduced because of the operating budget action taking last month to move modeling in-house. I actually project that, or suspect that by the time we actually get to 26, when we do a new budget look, at that time, those lines will be 0. Down at the bottom, you see the taper factor. Again, as had been established previously, we purposely under budget revenue that we are projecting out 6 years as a safety factor to as I've said previously, the one thing as CFO I do not want to do is 5, 6, 7 years down the road, come back to the authority and say, you've got to cancel or postpone projects because we've overshot our revenue line. And that would then put the authority members in the position of having to pick a project or two to take that action on. So a lot of what we see here is designed to make sure we avoid that. A final note on the regional revenue fund, the regional revenue fund money goes to projects. So while there may be year-to-year fluctuations, if there is an overbalance in 1 year by using audited fund balance, that money comes back into circulation through the process. And in the interim time, this is also what we've worked out with our auditors and allows us to advance fund projects or advance appropriate projects. And it includes, this is part of that safety net to make sure that when we're looking 6 years down the road, the authority is not getting over its skis by projecting revenue and allocating it to projects and then running the risk of it not being there. With that, I'd be pleased to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Longi. And I must say that the pay-go amount is extremely impressive. Very, very impressive. Any comments or questions?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
So I would associate myself with Madam Chair's comments. Mr. Longi, I actually, no one had any idea what COVID was going to be, what it was going to look like, how it's going to affect us in the area. And so I believe that you made some very prudent decisions during COVID. Projected things conservatively, and you always want to do that. And if it comes back, it comes back, but we don't want to be short. So first of all, I think that was very good decisions. In addition, the economy is in flux right now. The inflation rate is unfortunately fairly high, so we still are in flux in a lot of ways. And so you're still kind of projecting conservatively, and I still believe that's the right choice. My question is, with the amount of pay-go we have, how would that affect what we bond, or if we do more bond or less bond?
The flexibility to bond is still very much in play. The critical decision for the authority in bonding is you need to be able to use the money. You need to be able to deploy it. You cannot go to the market and get tax exempt bond proceeds and then not put them to use. The fact that the authority has a $1.3 billion investment portfolio, which is all of that money has been assigned to projects, but is waiting spending, basically takes bonding off the table. To answer your question, we could easily start doing bonding in increments of $100 or $200 million, and the debt service implication on that would not severely disrupt the revenue projections.
I have to say, I think what you just said is very important, is that so much of that money is already assigned. Because there are people who look at the bottom line and not realize that, and think for flesh, and in fact we're not. And then my only and last question is, has MBTA gone to the credit meetings for this year yet, for this fiscal year?
They come and do their due diligence and do a reevaluation. We are actually.
Are we still AA plus?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
We're AA plus, and they only check on us every 2 or 3 years.
Okay, wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Questions or comments?
Just a follow-up question on do we have to invest in that rating every single year, or is it just one time once we get that bond rating?
You pay the $30,000 or so for your rating. It's done at the issue. Yes.
But you don't have to continue to do that. Okay, so that's just one.
Would someone like to make the motion?
The Finance Committee recommended on to the Monthly Taxation Authority to adopt pay-go fund recommendations detailed in table 1.
Second.
Second.
Thank you, Millwood. Is there any further discussion?
One question. Stock market has been going down significantly several months. To what extent are we adjusting our investing or our projections going forward?
My concern for our projections on our investment portfolio, quite frankly, are that they're not high enough. Because we are not in the equity market, so what you see on the S&P and Dow is not impacting our portfolio at all. Since we are fixed income, instrument-based bonds, corporate notes, items like that, those typically rise in an environment where equities are going down. It hasn't done that to the extent that when we've seen that tipping point in other times. However, we were talking about inflation. Inflation favors fixed income. So as you look at your cities and counties, your investment portfolio's performance will increase in inflation, but your cost to issue debt will also increase. So the negative side for what we're seeing is, were we issuing debt, it would be more expensive. The other thing to remember, and I graduated with my undergraduate in '82 and was facing double-digit inflation and interest rate costs for cars and stuff like that, and also in the double digits. We've not experienced that for approximately 40 years. So as we look at the fact that inflation will drive up the earnings on the investment portfolio, it will drive up sales tax to some extent because things are more expensive. And the sales taxes applied on those more expensive things, the purchasing value of that dollar goes down. So my biggest concern in what we're seeing in the economy is not so much that our numbers will go down as far as raw numbers, but long-term, the purchasing power of the dollars that we bring in, which is frankly a risk now borne by the cities and counties, is going to be reduced the longer that money stays in a cash form in our investment portfolio. When we've talked to the RJAC meetings, I have been warning of inflation because many of the folks in those meetings are not of the same age group as myself, shall I say. And so I've been warning that it's going to be good to get that money deployed and used. Not only do we get the transportation aspect in use sooner, but when you have 8% and there's projections for 12% inflation, that's 8 to 12 cents per dollar that those dollars will purchase less for each year that money is not turned into that actual transportation asset. I'm sorry, Councilmember Snyder, that may have been more than.
Well, no, so in short, if your project is 50 million, like if you adopt the program in July and you have $50 million awarded, it may cost $60 million, and this could be total cost if you don't spend the money, if the money isn't spent now because of the inflationary market. We have tried to caution project sponsors and I know people don't like to do this because of congestion reduction relative to cost, but to make sure your contingencies include inflation, the cost of materials, the price of labor, everything that you're seeing is increasing to try to include that. Because when we adopt a funding program, we program every dollar. We don't have unallocated revenues available for any cost overrun.
So what I'm taking away for purposes of this meeting is that you looked at this and you balanced things out. And believe that the numbers you're giving us take reasonable account of all the strengths that we just discussed.
In addition, then the staff report goes into some risk mitigation factors. We have $120 million working capital reserve that is still there, ready to be deployed. The AA+ credit rating, the highest revenue bond issuance can achieve in the market. We could go back and get short-term financing. We have numerous tools in the toolbox to make sure that even if something were to happen and prior to having to reduce that 626 million in fiscal 26 or 27, there's a lot of tools still in our toolbox to mitigate any negative consequences.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I can say that our city is experiencing inflation already with our new downtown development, the cost of materials. Okay, it's been motioned and seconded. We had discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Thank you. Next, we have contract for financial statement audit services. Mr. Long.
Thank you. I'll be relatively brief with this. The Finance Committee previously had discussions on going out to the market and issuing an RFP or doing a contract rider to continue our audit services with PB Mayors LLP. The direction provided by the committee was to look for a rider. We found a rider with BRE, very suitable contract. Also, obviously local connection. The purpose for using the rider, I'll refresh memory or to Councilmember Snyder and Mayor Woodnow. We have two significant initiatives that were approved in the operating budget. One is an audit to detect the potential for duplicate reimbursements to basically protect the authority against errors that potentially could be made by project sponsors. The other one was to consulting services to bring our policies and our procedures into compliance so that we can be a recipient for federal funds moving forward. We envision that occurring mostly in collaboration with one of our member jurisdictions or agencies, not as a competitor to them. But if let's say the feds do a grant program that would benefit from showing a regional entity participating in it, then we could obviously then participate in it. By doing the contract rider, we speed up those two activities by about 6 to 8 months.
Are there any comments? I'm sorry, are you finished? Mr. Wall?
Yes.
Okay. Comments or questions? Do we have a motion?
I move finance committee recommendation of the authority or privilege to review the financial statement audit service agreement with PBM Lawyers LLP for the base years, fiscal years 2022 to 2024, with options to extend up to 4 additional years in 2-year increments.
Do we have a second? Any further discussion?
Madam Chair, I'm sorry. Yeah, one more question. Is this the current auditor? No,
Yes.
it is. And how long have they been the auditor?
Previously since 2014.
So generally speaking, you want to change auditors every now and then. So tell me a little bit more about why we're staying with this particular one.
The Government Finance Officers Association, typically known as GFOA, which does the capital awards for the Consolidated Annual Financial Reports Awards and budget awards, has actually come out with guidance that says there isn't a problem with staying with your existing auditor. Their prior guidance, I think from 15 years ago, was that you should switch your auditors about every 5 or 10 years. Audits have gotten so complex that the working papers from an audit are pretty substantial. So a new audit company, a new audit firm coming in would have to revisit all of those and the prior audits to make the transition. I will say with PB Mayors, they are not an easy audit firm. They do really put us through our paces. Ms. Teal does an excellent job of preparing, but there is a lot of back and forth and Q&A that goes on. And it's really not so much on the transactions. It's on things like the market value of the assessment or the investments. Because that is the operating budget transactions is not really a focal point for a risk area for the authority. It really is the investment portfolio. So again, the guidance from GFOA is that you can stay with the existing audit firm as long as they are continuing their qualification. One of the things that has changed in the interim time as well is the audit firms have to go through peer review. So they have to have other audit firms come in and do peer reviews on their audits. And I think that is one of the enhancements that over the years has given GFOA the confidence to be able to make that recommendation.
One further question. I know that the action is for the services 22 through 24, then options to extend for up to 4 additional years and 2-year increments. Is it our option?
Yes.
In other words, we might want to decide we want to change in auditors after FY 2024, and we could do that.
Technically, you could change it after 1 year.
And this firm and the fees this firm charges are consistent with the market.
Yes.
And I know several of our regional partners use this firm as well. I think that we just have an experience with these type of things.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, it's already been motioned and seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Thank you. Next, we have investment and portfolio report. Ms. Singh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Looking at page 4 of the staff report, and I'll try to be audible as possible. Looking at the page 4 of the investment staff report, you could see that our yield has been increasing on an upward swing when compared to our benchmark. We are continuing the strategy of investing 30 million a month in maturities. We have 2 securities maturing this month. One is a Federal Farm Credit Bank, which is an agency, and the yield to maturity is at 0.75%. And the other one is Barclays, which is a commercial paper, and the yield to maturity is at 0.16%. The 2-year treasury this morning was at 2.56%, and our strategy is to reinvest maturing securities in a 2-year treasury market. The reason being the difference in yields will be 180 basis points higher for the agency and 240 basis points higher for the commercial paper.
How many basis points are for the agency?
Yeah,
How many?
180. 1.8% higher rate of return than when it was invested previously. Inflation does help on the portfolio side.
Okay, okay.
and the other factor is treasury market is highly liquid. So with this information, I conclude my presentation and I'm happy to take any questions.
Does that conclude your report? Okay. Are there any comments or questions? Thank you very much, Ms. Sen. Mr. Longi, would you like to go through the next several in a lump and then stop for questions?
On the revenue side, I can sum it up. The revenues continue to exceed expectations. But this increased level of revenue is built into the 23 projections, next fiscal year projections. I'll note with that the sales tax bump that we got with the internet application, internet sales is now built into the baseline. But with that, our revenues are extremely strong. And the next item is the operating budget, and we are underspending the operating budget. So I don't see any problems where we would have to come back to the authority to ask for any additional operating budget support.
Well, we'd love to hear that we're exceeding expectations. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Longi, is the internet bump the Wayfair? Is that the Wayfair here? Okay, right.
Comments or questions? Mr. Longi? Thank you, Mr. Longi. Ms. Backman?
Madam Chair, the only thing I would note regarding the pay-go amount that's available for the 6-year program update, it may look like a big number, but when you look at the total request, it's $1.2 billion. Additionally, the total cost of the project is $3 billion. So that really speaks to the need to, number one, retrieve all of our monies that were diverted to Metro that balance $38.5 million. And number two, make sure that transportation is adequately funded. So I just want to leave with that because to some that may appear to be a huge number, but again, it's about half of the total request. So once again, we will not be able to fund everything entirely on the authority's end.
Okay, understood. Thank you. Is there anything else?
I do have one more question, Madam Chair. Are we investing in any small banks, any local banks?
Actually,
I think we do. It's John, I see John Marshall. Is that the only one?
it's currently the only one. United Bank is also classified as a local / regional bank. They have done a presentation. For the
Okay,
committee some time ago.
We have a lot in United Bank. So, okay, that's good. So,
We actually have a program with the local banks, and they have to be highly qualified local
sure,
banks.
sure.
That allows them to accept deposits at a slightly higher rate of return. But the strategy is that they can call on a deposit from us rather than doing a retail CD or deposit building campaign. So it's much more efficient for them. The key ingredient with that, and what really does benefit the bank, is they can put that money back to us. Because Deb and I can find an alternative use for those funds very quickly. So if the bank were to say, I'll pay you this much for this money for 6 months, but then find out that its loans didn't materialize, which is how the banks actually make their money, didn't materialize as expected, we would allow them to put that money back to us. And that is, it's really a strategy designed to keep money that was raised in Northern Virginia in Northern
And that's
Virginia.
kind of why I'm asking the question.
Yeah,
That's
good.
actually why I'm asking the question, because as I look, I see a lot of our investments are in places that are not not only Northern Virginia, but Virginia at all. I didn't realize United Bank was a regional bank, so that actually helps, but much of our money is invested in many other places besides Northern Virginia or even Virginia. So that's right. I actually think we should try to invest in regional, local, or Commonwealth banks when we can.
We previously had, I think, 4 or 5 banks that we were associated with, but frankly, banks have not needed deposits.
Yeah, that's right. I
That's
know
what it
it's
is.
it's a high standard. Okay, yeah, I understand that.
Any other comments?
Madam Chair, one last thing for me. I just want to thank Mike and the finance team. And when we estimate, we contact the localities to see how they are estimating. Because as Mike noted earlier, we do not want to be in a position of having to defund. We didn't have to do it 2 years ago. We don't want to do it now. We consider it a plus when we receive additional revenues than we had anticipated. But this is out year money. When we were early in AB 2313, we were doing a funding program with the current fiscal year, but now we're not. So there's a lot of estimation going on. And even with the Commonwealth, with the 64 I-81 revenue not being where they originally thought, and now they are, things like that, we still want to estimate conservatively. And even with that, we do have $626 million in estimated revenues to do this funding program. So I do want to say kudos to the team.
Absolutely, absolutely. I echo that. And I want to thank staff for all your hard work, your attention to detail, and the careful budgeting that has gone on. Thank you very much. Is there anything else to come before the committee?
Madam Chair, just a question about investing, and I don't know the answer tonight, but are we on the lookout for green bonds and entities that invest in green bonds? And we shouldn't sacrifice quality. I'm not talking about sacrificing investment quality or rating for that, but it might be interesting to see, are we doing something in that area?
We're not opposed to them. There's nothing in our policy and there's nothing in our practice that avoids them. Green bonds are going through a definition challenge.
I know, believe me.
So, and green bonds currently typically pay less than treasuries, agencies, et cetera. So by comparison, on a yield basis, they don't show up well. In addition to that, you currently oftentimes do not know if you are truly getting a green bond when you purchase what is advertised as a green bond. And that has, to be upfront with you, that has made me shy of making a formal allocation of a percentage of the portfolio or so for that. That market is certainly going to mature and standards will be put in place. And I think at that point it'd be a more prudent time to have a formal structure.
So it may well be that the investments that we're making in large entities, they in turn invest in. So all I'm asking for is just you remain sensitive to that, and that we might do, if you have a little downtime to do research, to what extent are we already,
Well, that market is pumping information to us on an hourly basis, Monday through Friday.
Since there's nothing else, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.